Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching a special broadcast here on DD India. And with me is a very special guest, India's ambassador to the US, Mr. Taranjit Singh Sandhu. Ambassador Sandhu, welcome to DD India.
Thank you, Ramesh.
Good to see you, Ambassador. But before I proceed any further, just for the benefit of our viewers tuning in from India and around the world, Ambassador Sandhu assumed charge as the ambassador to the US in February 2020, and he served in the Indian mission in Washington, D.C. on 2 occasions in the past. He was Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy from July 2013 to January 2017. And prior to that, from 1997 to 2000, he was First Secretary Political at the Embassy, responsible for liaison with the United States Legislature, and is also a former High Commissioner of India to Sri Lanka from January 2017 to January 2020. Ambassador Sandhu, if I can start by asking you for your opening comments on the just concluded visit of Foreign Minister Jaishankar to the US. What are the outcomes of those talks in Washington, D.C.?
So, Ramesh, External Affairs Minister was the first cabinet minister who made an in-person visit after the Biden administration took charge. Of course, this happened because of the COVID situation. EM during his visit met the key members of Biden administration, and that included his counterpart, Secretary of State Blinken, the National Security Advisor Sullivan, the Defense Secretary Austin, USTR Ambassador Tai, then the DNI Haynes. He also met high officials from all major departments and organizations that deal with India. And that included the White House, National Security Council, Treasury, Commerce, Energy, USAID, Defense, Homeland Security, etc. EM also had conversations with prominent members of the US Congress, and that included the chair and the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee, and also the India caucus, as well as key senators. Then he had important interactions with the private sector, and that included US-India Business Council, as well as the USIS-PF, that is US-India Strategic Policy Forum. Now, these are 2 key chambers, and in both these, senior industry leaders participated. And during these meetings, he highlighted the investment opportunities in India, particularly about PLI schemes. And EM also engaged major strategic experts. Obviously, the COVID-19 and the pandemic response in India was discussed. EM also appreciated the solidarity that was expressed and the support that has been extended by the US administration, Congress, private sector, and of course, American public, which includes the diaspora. Amongst other bilateral and regional issues that were discussed, Afghanistan and Quad were among them. Now, in sum, EM's visit was significant, substantial, comprehensive, and productive, and it deepened our engagement with the new administration.
Indeed. Ambassador Sandhu, how would you describe the current state of play in the India-US ties, especially under Prime Minister Modi in India and President Biden in the US?
So, Ramesh, I would say that it's a steady upward path. Now, let's take into account the first 100 days of Biden administration. A number of high-level interactions have taken place. Prime Minister Modi has spoken to President Biden 3 times. Vice President Harris has called Prime Minister earlier this month. Then, of course, PM has participated in the 2 top summits that have taken place. One is the Quad, the second is the Climate Leaders Summit, and in both there were substantial outcomes, and PM was very much right in front. Then, of course, I have just mentioned to you that EM has visited the United States last month. It had a number of interactions otherwise too with his counterpart, that is Secretary Blinken, then Defense Secretary Austin, and Special Envoy Secretary Kerry both visited India earlier this year. Then our ministers of finance, commerce, energy, health, they have all spoken to their counterparts. The National Security Advisor has been in close touch with his US counterpart, Jake Sullivan. These exchanges have laid a solid foundation and imparted fresh momentum to positive engagement between our two countries. And these have translated into tangible outcomes. Let me give you one example. Let's take the case of COVID cooperation. You know, India and the US have stood with each other. The recent surge, President Biden picked up the phone, called our Prime Minister. He conveyed solidarity, told him that US is standing with India, and also recalled that India had helped US last year when the United States was in need. And this was followed up with 7 plane loads of essential medical items, almost worth $100 million. And they have all arrived in India. Then US Congress, we have received bipartisan support there. Almost 150 congressmen, senators have expressed solidarity with India. Private sector, again, we have seen a lot of activity. All the top companies have come forward. More than $350 million worth stuff has been delivered in India. A global task force on pandemic was established, and this involved US Chambers of Commerce, Business Roundtable, US IBC, US ISPF. You know, at present, there are 5 immediate priorities between the two administrations. First is healthcare and pharma, and that includes COVID-19 management, including affordable medicines, vaccines. Then second is on the digital space, and that includes information technology, innovation, startups. The third would be energy sector, and that includes LNG, renewables, solar. That will all allow us to combat the climate change. And the fourth is education and knowledge partnership. And finally, you know, our cooperation in strategic and defense areas, which include Indo-Pacific and Quad, is again very much in the forefront. So I'm confident that all this will be a solid foundation for the relationship between our two countries to deepen.
Ambassador Sandhu, you spoke about education as one of the elements of the bilateral ties, and that gives me a perfect segue into my next question. Now, let's talk a bit about the Indian students in the US. Now, students and parents alike have some concerns about visa issues, for instance, travel or vaccination at the time of COVID-19. What would you like to tell them on this broadcast?
See, Ramesh, knowledge and education partnership is a very important pillar between our two countries. You would be aware that we have 200,000 Indian students in the US, and that's a source of strength between our two countries. They are an important bridge. Right. And mind you, most of these kids are in STEM areas. So they bring value to both the sides. Their well-being is a key priority for us. Let me take you first to the start of COVID-19. You would recall at that time, there was a lot of anxiety. The embassy reached out to various stakeholders, not only in administration, amongst the universities. I spoke to different presidents myself, then the Indian American community. All came up to support the Indian students. There was an embassy student hub that got very active, and real-time advice by students was given through their own run peer support line. Further, you will recall, we coordinated special flights. A total of 800 special flights were operated out of the US. This took almost 170,000 people, including students, to India. I myself had several virtual interactions with the students to reassure them. Now, coming to the existing travel restrictions from the US, you have to keep in mind that COVID-19 is still around, and we are in an unprecedented situation. Right. But what I understand that the US Embassy in Delhi is providing guidance relating to US policy and visa appointments. Now, visa appointments, I believe, have been opened up. Obviously, there is rush, but we are pressing here and we hope that the students will be able to join in the fall session. On the vaccination front, I'm given to understand that per se, as of now, there is no requirement of vaccination to obtain a visa. But individual universities will decide their own vaccination policies.
I see.
And on OPT, I believe some students are not able to return due to restrictions and their training is getting affected. Now we are sensitizing the US authorities in this regard and also trying to help them out. All in all, I want to underline to you, look, there is certainly an unprecedented situation, but we remain engaged with the US side so that the Indian students do not lose out on the academic session.
Absolutely. Ambassador Sandhu, talking about visits between India and the US. Now, the US has indicated that it could probably host a Quad summit, probably in September this year. Now, what have you heard about it, and what might be on its agenda when the leaders from India, the US, Japan, and Australia meet?
See, Ramesh, Quad is an important platform for like-minded countries to pull together their strengths and tackle global challenges. You are aware that the first Quad Virtual Leaders Summit took place in March this year, and there were 3 practical areas of cooperation, tangible outcomes. First one was on Quad vaccine. This is essentially, as I said, combining the strength of all 4 Quad members. So you have US technology, Japanese investments, Australian lift power, and finally, Indian ability to produce vaccines. Second was on climate change, and third on critical technologies. And experts are already working together to put this, to implement this. Now, at the same summit, there was an undertaking, there was a joint statement issued, which stated that an in-person summit will be held by end of 2021. Now, we are working towards that. That summit will take place, of course, subject to the global pandemic situation. And the exact dates are being worked out as per the convenience of all the 4 leaders.
Indeed. And Ambassador Sandhu, when you talk about the Quad, one can't help but also talk about the Indo-Pacific as one of the key regions of the world. Now, the Indo-Pacific has acquired a salience of its own of late, and India stands for a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. How do you see India-US cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region?
See, this is a very significant area of our cooperation. And I think the first 100 days of Biden administration clearly demonstrate that. But just to draw your attention, the first time the Quad countries came together was during President George W. Bush's time in December 2004, when we had the Indian Ocean tsunami, and they had come together. Then during President Obama's time, you know, a joint strategic vision for Asia Pacific and Indian Ocean region came out when he came for the famous Republic Day visit as the chief guest. Then during President Trump's time, this got further strengthened into Indo-Pacific. And when President Biden came, despite all questions and all kinds of doubts, there has been strong convergence, as you said, for a free, open, inclusive Indo-Pacific. President Biden's first summit was the Quad Virtual Summit. And there have been several engagements by the new US administration with the Indo-Pacific region. Now you have had visits from Japan, South Korea, Australia, Cambodia, Thailand, etc. Right. The statements by President Biden, Secretary Blinken, the National Security Advisor, and other senior officials, they have repeatedly emphasized the importance of Indo-Pacific. And finally, the interim strategic guidance document that the United States has come out with, the only strategic document so far, very clearly underlines the importance of Indo-Pacific. And I must mention here that there is increased interest in the Indo-Pacific in Europe too, who are the traditional partners of US. And that actually signifies to the convergence on the subject. And as I mentioned earlier, that the Quad Summit is expected to take place by end of the year. And this will take this cooperation forward. Now, a word about India's commitment to Indo-Pacific. You know, Prime Minister Modi has come out with what we call SAGAR, that is security and growth for all in the region. And our commitment and our vision is clearly reflected in that. This actually also fits into our Act East policy. And ever since pandemic has started, I may add here that India has been undertaking regular consultations with select countries in the Indo-Pacific. And we have had exchange of information, best practices, including supply of COVID vaccines to Indo-Pacific countries.
Indeed. And talking about US vaccines, Ambassador Sandhu, would you have an update for us in terms of number of vaccines promised by the US for India or received by India so far, and the brands of vaccines in particular?
See, Ramesh, again, it's very important to underline here that healthcare sector cooperation between the United States and India is an important pillar.
Right.
And during the COVID, as it has been mentioned repeatedly by different US leaders, that India came forward to help the United States with medicines, PPEs last year. And in the second upsurge we have had, the United States has come with extensive support, one from the US administration, US Congress, private sector, American people. And in this, India is set to get part of the US global vaccines allocations that are being made, both under all categories. One, under their neighbors and partners. And in this, I would like to draw your attention that President Biden, when he spoke a few weeks back, he named 4 countries. India was one of them. Secondly, through the COVAX initiative, which will come through the WHO. In both these, India is very much part. And also, just last week, he announced about 500 million vaccines, which will be given to several countries. Again, India is one of them. Additionally, I would also like to draw your attention here that there are 6 vaccine cooperations and collaborations that are being undertaken right now between India and the US under the bilateral arrangement. And in fact, last week, I visited the Novavax, which has tied up with Serum Institute. And they are going to be coming very shortly into India. Then I also have been to Oxygen, which is the partner of Bharat Biotech. And then we have Johnson & Johnson, which has tied up with India's BioE. I am also aware, and I'm sure you are hearing, Pfizer and Moderna, Indeed. They are working on strong tie-ups with Indian partners. So therefore, we hope to see good progress in coming days. And I'm hopeful that the first batch of US vaccines will be soon on their way to India.
Indeed. In fact, Moderna has just got the approval from the Indian government at that. Ambassador Sandhu, let's talk a bit, if you will, about supply chain resilience. Now, building a resilient supply chain is a priority for many a country around the world, including India and the US. And the pandemic has imparted an urgency to this issue. How are India and the US collaborating on this front?
See, the global pandemic has certainly demonstrated the vulnerability of supply chains. And what it has indicated is that over-reliance on one geography for basic equipment and goods, including PPEs, testing kits, etc., is not a sound policy. And therefore, we have been engaging the US side, underlining that India is a reliable alternative, and India's recent reforms in FDI, including our PLIs in 14 sectors, are playing a very significant part. And in this, I'd like to underline that the Prime Minister himself has taken the initiative and spoken about to several prospective investors, including sovereign funds in the US, to encourage them to invest in India. The Finance Minister has had several interactions with the Chambers of Commerce here. EM, as I mentioned during his visit, interacted with the private sector. Our Minister of Commerce and Industry and the USTR here have been having productive conversations. So India and the US are also working with like-minded countries to ensure robust and supply chains. And in this, I'd like to draw your attention that one of the focus areas in the Quad is supply chains. So therefore, I'm sure that a lot of movement will be taking place. Yes.
Indeed. And how is the defense and security relationship shaping up between India and the US, Ambassador Sandhu, in the bilateral, regional, or global arenas?
So Ramesh, we have now a very broad-based defense partnership with the US. And this covers all aspects of defense cooperation. You know, you are aware, and this was very significant, that Defense Secretary Austin made his first overseas visit to India. This reflected the priority which the new administration is according to India. Now, there are several important developments in the strategic and defense sphere. One, the designation of India as major defense partner. Second, the strategic trade authorization for India. And third, of course, Industrial Security Annex, which was signed during December 2019, second 2+2. Now, all these give a recognition to our robust defense ties. You are also aware that we have signed all the foundation agreements with each other. The defense trade itself has grown over $21 billion in just one decade. Now, this cooperation also covers joint exercises. We have just had with US Navy, both our Air Force and Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean. Then there is training, joint research, technology cooperation, also co-development and co-production of defense platforms. And reform measures which Government of India has undertaken in the defense sector recently, which has opened up new opportunities for beneficial cooperation. I know that number of US companies are showing interest in that. And in this, I would again like to highlight that during the time we were recently under stress on the defense side, the US administration, the US Congress, they demonstrated their commitment to India. You know, almost 100 members of US Congress came out in public support of India. And indeed, defense cooperation has established itself as one of the significant dimensions of our relationship with the United States.
Absolutely. Ambassador Sandhu, trade and investment is another important pillar of the bilateral ties. How is that coming along?
So again, you are absolutely right. Look, for a robust relationship, a robust bilateral economic partnership is very essential. Our trade is now over $150 billion. This has been despite the challenges posed by the pandemic. And you will be surprised to know that the bilateral trade has actually increased by 9% last year, despite the pandemic. Now, investment, there is $70 billion two-way investment. In 2020 and 21, US became the second largest source of FDI into India, $14 billion. And UN investors have shown a lot of interest in infrastructure investment in India, especially under the National Infrastructure Pipeline. You will be aware that there's presence of over 2,000 US companies in India, and these include every major Fortune 500 company. Interestingly, in the US too, there are over 200 Indian companies that have created over 125,000 jobs here. And they have invested more than $22 billion. And of course, I agree with you, there's a potential to do much more. In fact, we remain committed to the ambitious target of $500 billion bilateral trade. And there are several bilateral platforms which will be getting activated again. That is India-US Commercial Dialogue, there is CEO Forum, there is Trade Policy Forum. And all these will advance this common objective. So all in all, there is an excitement and enthusiasm here to deepen these linkages, both in the government as well as in the private sector.
Right. On that note, Ambassador Sandhu, may I thank you once again for making time for us here at DD India. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ramesh.
And with that, it's a wrap. But news continues here on DD India. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile, and digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.